The snow had been falling since before anyone at Northgate Regional Hospital thought to check the forecast, soft at first, then heavy enough by 6 in the morning to turn the parking lot into a white silence that swallowed the sound of everything except the automatic doors sliding open and closed at the emergency entrance. On the ground floor, where the linoleum always needed one more pass before the day shifts arrived, Garrett Hume pushed a wide mop along the corridor with the unhurried rhythm of someone who had learned that the hospital rewarded invisibility. His cart smelled of disinfectant and something faintly floral from the cleaning solution the supply room had switched to in September without asking anyone who actually used it. He moved past the cardiology wing, past the nurse's station, where the overnight staff were too tired to notice him, past the bulletin board with its cheerful fundraising posters for the new pediatric unit that had been coming for 3 years now without arriving. His daughter had been up past 10 finishing a science project about migratory birds. She was 9, and she had strong opinions about the Arctic tern that she had shared at length while he made sandwiches and tried to remember if Tuesday was library day or gym. He had written it on his hand in pen. The ink had smeared. Above him, through the fire door at the end of the wing, voices were rising in the administrative corridor on the second floor. Not the low, urgent murmur of a medical emergency. Something else. The kind of voices that happened when money was involved and people had run out of polite language for it. Garrett did not go to the second floor. That was not his territory. His cart stayed to the ground floor in the basement mechanical rooms. He had learned the boundaries early and had not tested them since. But the fire door, older than anything else in this wing, had never sealed properly in cold weather. It breathed, and through it, if a person happened to be mopping close enough, which Garrett was, you could hear almost every word from the stairwell landing above. The voice he heard first belonged to someone speaking with the tight precision of a person who had rehearsed this. Budget authority. Breach of covenant threshold. Federal reimbursement shortfall. Then another voice, a woman's, lower but sharper. Are you telling me we are closing the obstetrics ward? Not a question. The flatness of it said she already knew. Garrett stopped pushing the mop. The answer from the first voice said yes. Effective the 15th. Financial Review Committee has signed off. Provincial funding is 4 months in arrears. The federal top-up was denied at the last review cycle, and the liability reserve is short by. He lost the next number when a gurney rolled past him from admissions. But he had heard enough of the sentence to understand the shape of it. He stood still for a moment in the empty corridor, one hand on the mop handle, looking at nothing in particular. Then he started moving again, because standing still drew attention, and he had learned that too. The obstetrics ward was on the 3rd floor. Garrett had never worked up there, but he knew someone who had. One of the evening housekeeping staff, a woman named Brenda, had transferred down after her knees started giving her trouble. She had talked about the ward the way people talk about a place they still miss. The nurses there know every patient's name, she had said. Some of those women have nobody else in that room with them. Garrett thought about that for the rest of his shift. He thought about it while he rinsed the mop bucket in the utility closet, while he refilled the soap dispensers in the ground floor bathrooms, while he signed out at the housekeeping office at 7:15, collecting his coat from the hook labeled in masking tape with a name that nobody in administration had ever read closely enough to pronounce correctly at the one staff meeting he had attended. He was almost at the exit when his cartwheel caught on the edge of the doormat and tipped a stack of papers that had been left on top of the cart by someone in a hurry. He had picked them up without looking, stacked them, meant to leave them at the front desk. He looked at them instead. Not because he was supposed to, because one line on the top sheet stopped him the same way a bad step stops you on a dark staircase. Your body knows before your mind catches up. It was a line in a budget summary. A federal reimbursement figure followed by an eligibility classification code that Garrett recognized because he had spent 4 years before any of this learning what those codes meant and why they mattered. The classification was wrong, not by interpretation. Wrong the way a street address is wrong. The code applied to a short-term acute care facility. Northgate Regional was not a short-term acute care facility. It held a continuing care designation that carried a different reimbursement formula entirely, a more generous one. His hand tightened around the paper stack. He stood in the hospital lobby with the automatic doors breathing cold air at him from outside, and thought about what he was about to do, and thought about his daughter, and thought about Brenda's voice when she talked about the women on the 3rd floor, and then stopped thinking and went back toward the administrative wing. The woman he needed to talk to was Dr. Frances Okafor, the hospital's chief operating officer. Garrett had seen her twice. Once in the parking lot when she had walked past him without any indication that he existed. Once in the ground floor corridor when she had paused to ask the nursing station something, and he had been mopping 12 feet away, which was close enough to see that she had the kind of attention that noticed everything except people who cleaned things. He did not expect this to go well. He knocked on the frame of the open office door anyway. Dr. Frances Okafor looked up from a document that appeared to be making her very unhappy. She was a tall woman, somewhere in her mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and the expression of someone who had already had 3 conversations this morning that she would rather not have had. She looked at Garrett's uniform, his cart, his ID badge with a photo that had come out slightly blurred because the camera battery had been dying. "I think there's an error in the reimbursement classification," he said. She did not answer immediately. The silence was the kind that asks whether you are seriously doing this. "The document you're looking at," he continued, holding out the papers. "The federal submission. The eligibility code on line 7 identifies Northgate as a short-term acute care facility, but the hospital holds a continuing care designation from the last accreditation cycle. The reimbursement formula is different." She took the papers, not dismissively, not generously. She took them the way a person takes something when they are not yet sure whether it is relevant. "Where did you get these?" "They fell off my cart. Someone left them. I was going to bring them to the desk." Her eyes moved from the papers to him and back. "You read budget classification codes." He said nothing. She looked at line 7. "Our fiscal coordinator manages federal submissions," she said finally. "This has been reviewed." Garrett had expected this. He had rehearsed something on the walk back down the corridor, which was not a thing he was accustomed to doing, but which had seemed necessary. "The continuing care rate is approximately 31% higher per bed day than the short-term acute rate," he said. "If this facility has been submitting under the wrong code for multiple quarters, the cumulative underpayment would be significant. Significant enough that a corrected submission might change the funding picture you're currently looking at." Dr. Frances Okafor removed her reading glasses from her hair and put them on. She read line 7 again. "Who are you?" she said. "Garrett Hume. Housekeeping. Ground floor and basement." She was quiet for a moment that stretched past comfortable. "How do you know what the continuing care reimbursement rate is?" He had not planned to answer that. He answered it anyway because she had asked directly and he did not have a better way out of the room. Before this, he said, "I was an auditor. Health sector. I did federal reimbursement compliance for 7 years." She looked at him in the specific way people look at someone when they are rapidly revising something they assumed. "Then why are you mopping floors?" He said it plainly, without apology. "Because my wife got sick when my daughter was 2, and I needed shift work that let me be at home when she needed me. And then my wife died, and I needed shift work even more than that." He paused. "The classification code is still wrong either way." Dr. Frances Okafor stood up from her desk. "Come with me," she said. The fiscal coordinator's name was Harold Stinson, and he was a compact, confident man who had been in his role for 11 years, and who reacted to Garrett's presence in his office the way most people in that building reacted to Garrett's presence anywhere above the ground floor, with a confusion that shaded quickly into something less friendly. Frances closed the door behind them. "Harold," she said, "I need you to pull the last 4 federal reimbursement submissions." Harold looked at Garrett. "Who is this?" He noticed something I need verified. Harold's expression did something complicated. He turned to his computer. "The submissions are current. They've been through review." "Pull them," Frances said. Harold pulled them. He placed the cursor on line 7 of the current submission with the impatient precision of a man demonstrating that this was unnecessary. "Short-term acute," Garrett said quietly. "But the last accreditation report is not Harold's domain," Harold said without turning around. Garrett looked at the screen. The code had been there across all 4 submissions, 14 months of filings. He leaned slightly forward and pointed at the accreditation designation field, 2 screens away in the facility master file. "There's," he said. "The system has the correct designation on file. But the reimbursement submission template is pulling from a different table. It's not reading the master record. It's reading an older, imported field that was never updated when the designation changed." Harold's typing slowed. "The imported field is from the previous accreditation cycle," Garrett continued. "When the facility was still under short-term acute, the system migration didn't map it correctly." Harold opened second window, then a third. His typing had a different quality now. Frances stood at the window with her arms crossed, watching Harold's screen and not Garrett. The room stayed quiet except for keyboard sounds for almost 2 minutes. Then Harold stopped typing. He did not turn around immediately. When he did, his face had the particular stillness of a person absorbing something they do not want to be true. "The template is pulling from a legacy field," he said. Frances looked at him. "How long?" Harold checked the migration timestamp. Since the system changeover, 2 years, 4 months. The number that followed that sentence, once Harold ran the corrected formula against the submitted quarters, was not a small one. Garrett watched the figure appear on screen and felt something he had not felt in a long time inside a building like this. Not pride, exactly. More like the specific relief of a number finally sitting where it belonged. Francis turned toward him slowly. "This is a recoverable error." "Yes," he said. "Federal reimbursement corrections for administrative misclassification can be submitted retroactively within a defined window. You'll need a compliance letter and supporting documentation from the accreditation body, but the claim is valid." "How much?" Francis said. Harold did the calculation with a kind of deliberate slowness that meant he was hoping the number would change. It did not. He turned the monitor toward her. Francis looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Garrett. Then she picked up her phone. What followed was the kind of mourning that hospitals are not built for. Northgate Regional knew how to absorb tragedy and urgency and the specific grief of bad news delivered in small rooms. It did not know how to absorb its own administration, discovering that a spreadsheet mapping error had quietly been costing it $2.3 million in legitimate federal funding over 28 months. By 9 o'clock, the legal team was involved. By 10, the federal reimbursement consultant Francis had called was on the phone from Ottawa, walking Harold through the corrected submission process. By 10:40, the board chair had been reached and was asking questions that Harold was struggling to answer with his usual confidence. Garrett had been told he could go back to his shift. He had gone back to his shift. He was in the basement mechanical room checking supply levels when his supervisor, a quiet man named Terry, who had worked the building longer than anyone, appeared in the doorway and told him Dr. Okafor wanted him upstairs. Garrett set down the clipboard. Terry looked at him with an expression that suggested he had heard something this morning that he had not yet decided how to classify. "The board is up there," Terry said. "I know," Garrett said. "You want me to come?" Garrett thought about it. "No," he said. "I'm okay." He was not entirely sure that was true, but he said it, which was usually how he got through things. The board had gathered in the second-floor conference room, which was larger and quieter than Francis's office and had a long oval table that made every conversation feel more official than it needed to be. 6 people sat around it. Francis stood near the window. Harold sat at the far end with the expression of a man who understood his role in this story had changed significantly since 8 in the morning. Garrett sat where Francis indicated, which was in the middle of one side of the table, which meant everyone could look at him without turning their heads, which was exactly as comfortable as it sounds. The board chair, a retired physician named Dr. Kenneth Achimpong, spoke first. He had the calm, particular authority of someone who had spent decades delivering information that people needed to hear regardless of whether they were ready. "Mr. Hume," he said, "Dr. Okafor has explained what you identified this morning. I'd like to understand it in your own words, if that's all right." Garrett explained it. He kept it factual: the classification code, the system migration, the legacy field, the reimbursement formula differential, the retroactive claim window. He did not editorialize. He did not mention that he had been standing in a hospital lobby holding papers that were not his to read and had made a decision in about 4 seconds that had taken most of the morning to play out. When he finished, Dr. Kenneth Achimpong looked at him with a steadiness that suggested he was being measured for something Garrett had not agreed to be measured for. "How certain are you about the retroactive window?" one of the other board members asked. "A woman with silver hair in a very precise manner. The federal guidance document is public," Garrett said. "Section 4, Administrative Error Provisions. The window is 36 months from date of discovery. You're well inside it." She wrote something down. Another board member, younger, leaning forward slightly. "How much of this is recoverable realistically?" Garrett looked at Harold because Harold had run the numbers and that was Harold's number to give. Harold, to his credit, answered her directly. "If the claim is submitted correctly and the accreditation documentation supports the continuing care designation retroactively, 2.1 to 2.3 million, minus any processing variance." The room absorbed that. Francis spoke from the window. "The obstetrics closure recommendation is currently under board review. I'm requesting a pause on that vote pending clarification of the funding picture." No one objected. Garrett noticed that and felt something loosen slightly in his chest that he had not realized was tight. Dr. Kenneth Achimpong looked at him again. "You said you did reimbursement compliance work before this." 7 years, Garrett said. "Health sector primarily. Federal and provincial submissions." He waited for the question everyone in the room was thinking. The board chair asked it without preamble, which Garrett respected. "Why did you leave that field?" Garrett had answered this once today already in Francis's office, but the boardroom version needed to be complete. My wife was diagnosed with MS when our daughter was 22 months old, he said. The disease moved faster than the literature suggested it would. I needed work that was shift-based, predictable, allowed me to be home in the mornings and evenings. The compliance work was contract-based. Travel, variable hours. I couldn't do both. The silver-haired board member had stopped writing. She passed away 3 years ago, Garrett continued. Celine. My daughter's name is Piper. She's 9. She's at school right now, I think working on a project about birds. He was not sure why he added that last part. Possibly because the room had gone very quiet and he wanted it to know that outside this building, there was a 9-year-old with opinions about Arctic terns who thought her father cleaned things for a living. The board chair said, I see. He said it in the way that means more than 2 words can usually carry. Frances moved from the window. She placed a folder on the table near Garrett. He looked at it without opening it. There is a position, she said carefully. The hospital has been looking to fill a compliance and revenue integrity role for 14 months. We haven't been able to attract candidates with the right background at the salary we can offer. Garrett looked at the folder. I'm not saying this because of this morning, Frances continued. Though this morning is a fairly significant demonstration of the qualification, I'm saying it because the role exists and you exist, and that seems like a fact worth acknowledging. Garrett opened the folder. He read the title. He read the first paragraph of the role description. He closed it. My daughter, he said. I pick her up every afternoon at 3:20. The board chair said that can be accommodated. When she's sick, I leave. Frances said that's what sick days are for. Some winters she's sick a lot. Frances looked at him steadily. Then you'll use them. Garrett looked at the closed folder. He thought about the parking lot in the dark at 6:30 in the morning, the snow, the automatic doors. He thought about Brenda talking about the 3rd floor. He thought about Piper explaining the Arctic terns migration route with total confidence while he was fairly sure he had misread the address for the school's spring concert. He opened the folder again. There's something else, he said. Frances waited. The ground floor housekeeping staff. Most of them are on variable shifts. 12 of the 14 have children at home. There's no on-site childcare, and the shift scheduling doesn't account for school dismissal windows. 3 of them are working a second job because the base rate hasn't tracked inflation in 4 years. The board member with the silver hair looked up from her notepad. Garrett kept his eyes on the folder. If you recover what I think you'll recover from the federal claim, some of that comes back to operating budget. I'd like the wage review to be part of the conversation before I sign anything. The room stayed quiet in a different way than before. Dr. Kenneth Achiampong said, You're negotiating on behalf of your colleagues before you've accepted the job. Garrett said, I know what it costs to survive a schedule that doesn't fit your life. Yes. A long pause. The board chair looked at Frances. Frances looked at the table. Then she looked at Garrett. I'll bring a compensation review proposal to the next board session, she said. Garrett looked at the folder one more time. He thought about Celine, who had said once, near the end, that he had the particular talent of noticing the thing everyone else had decided was not his job to notice. He had not thought of that as a talent at the time. He had thought of it as a problem. He picked up the pen from the table. He signed where indicated. He set the pen down with the careful precision of a person who does not make a production of things. The board meeting continued. Legal staff arrived to discuss the corrected submission timeline. Frances took a call from Ottawa. Harold produced the supporting documentation with the focused energy of someone trying to be useful after a difficult morning. Garrett sat near the wall, reviewing the accreditation records Frances had printed, noting 2 additional line items that would strengthen the retroactive claim. He was quiet about it. He worked the way he had always worked, without announcements, without requiring acknowledgement. At 12:40, he remembered that Piper's class had a scheduled library period on Tuesdays, and she would need her permission form by 3. He had filled it out the night before and left it on the kitchen counter. He had also, at some point this morning, lost the pen from his shirt pocket. He borrowed one from the analyst seated next to him and wrote a note on the corner of his legal pad. Permission form, counter, don't forget. He folded the note and put it in his pocket with the intention of calling the school during the next break to let them know it was coming. Frances appeared beside him during a brief recess between agenda items. How are you doing? She said quietly. Garrett considered the question with appropriate seriousness. I think I need to call the school, he said. Piper has a library day, and there's a form on my counter. Frances said nothing for a moment. Then she said, My assistant can call and let them know you're running behind, and the form will be there at pickup. That's not necessary, Garrett said. You found us $2 million before 8 in the morning, she said. Let someone make a phone call. He thought about saying that was different. He decided it was probably not. All right, he said. Francis nodded and went back to the head of the table. Outside, the snow had stopped. The parking lot was bright with reflected afternoon light, and the emergency entrance doors were opening and closing steadily with the ordinary traffic of people who needed help, and were arriving to find it. In the late afternoon, when the formal board session ended and the documentation work settled into the quieter rhythm of follow-through, Garrett walked out through the same lobby he had walked through every morning for the past 2 years. He was wearing the same uniform. His cart was still in the ground floor utility closet where he had left it, keys on the hook, the mop dried and upright, the soap dispenser refill he had been planning to do still sitting in the caddy. He stopped at the closet. He stood there for a moment looking at the cart. Then he locked the closet, returned the key to the board at the housekeeping office, and told Terry, who was reviewing the afternoon schedule, that he had something to talk to him about in the morning. Terry looked at him with the expression of a man who had heard enough today to no longer be surprised by whatever came next. All right, Terry said. Morning, then. Garrett walked out through the automatic doors. The cold was clean after the recycled warmth of the building. He stood for a moment on the cleared section of sidewalk, watching his breath. In the distance, past the parking lot, the city sounds were ordinary and indifferent, the way city sounds as always are when something significant has happened in a building and not yet made it to the street. He texted Piper's after-school program the standard message he sent when he was running a few minutes late. Got a little held up at work. Be there by 3:30. Don't eat all the crackers. The response came back in under a minute, a small drawing of a bird that Piper had somehow made using only punctuation, which she had been very proud of when she figured it out, and which still made him smile every time. He started toward the bus stop. He thought about the obstetrics ward on the 3rd floor, which was not closing today, which would have a different conversation next month than the one that had been planned for this morning. He thought about the women Brenda had described, the ones with nobody else in the room. He thought about a formula error sitting quietly in a system migration table for 28 months, invisible to everyone who had the authority to look for it, seen finally by a man who had no authority at all, and a mop that needed a new head. He thought about Celine and what she would have said, and decided she would have made a joke first and then said something true afterward, which was generally how she handled things. He thought about Piper, who believed he spent his days making things clean for important people. He was going to have to figure out how to explain today. He had some time on the bus to work on it. The short version, probably because she was 9 and had a library form to hand in and opinions about birds that would almost certainly re-enter the conversation before dinner. The bus arrived on time, which in a Canadian February was the kind of small, reliable thing that deserved notice. He got on. He found a seat by the window. Outside, Northgate Regional Hospital stood in the pale winter light, its windows lit from within, its emergency doors still breathing open and closed, its obstetrics ward on the 3rd floor still quiet and still there, still belonging to the city that needed it. Because one number had sat wrong in a man's mind at 6:40 in the morning and he had not been able to let it go.